Recently, the Lakers were swept in the Western Conference Finals by the Denver Nuggets. And the Lakers are flashy. They're the Showtime Lakers, and they have LeBron, who is the biggest name in basketball and possibly the biggest name in sports. And the Nuggets are kind of boring, right? Denver is a bit of a small market team. Their star player, Jokić, he is like, he's actually really funny and really amusing, but he's not on social media. He doesn't give these fiery interviews. He's not on like any commercials. He doesn't have signature shoes, I don't think. He doesn't have any of this stuff. He's just already kind of living in the shadows of the NBA, but he's a multiple-time MVP award winner. A lot of people think he should have won the regular season MVP again. He just won the Western Conference MVP, and odds are he's going to win the championship this year unless Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat are able to do something about that. So, the Nuggets just swept the Lakers, which, if you're not familiar with that vocabulary, that means that they beat them 4 games in a row, which is very, very difficult to do. It's difficult to sweep a team. The series are best of 7, first to 4 games win. They just won game, and it was over. They humiliated LeBron and the Lakers. But the most interesting thing happened. In the press conference right after they were swept, LeBron took back control of the narrative. He kind of hinted that he might retire, even though most sources close to him think there's no way he's going to retire. Anyway, all of a sudden, for the next, 48, 72 hours, the next week of coverage, no one is talking about the Nuggets, who've had this historic season, best team in the regular season, best team in the playoffs, just swept LeBron and the Lakers, and no one's talking about them. They're only talking about LeBron. And I wanted to share this clip. I thought Charles Barkley had a great perspective on this, talking about all the attention that LeBron is getting.
I was disappointed he brought that up in the Nuggets highlight of their organization. They'd never been to the finals. They just swept the big bad Lakers. Nobody's giving them any respect.
But do you think he did it strategically, Charles? Because LeBron is very calculated.
Yes. Because them fools on ESPN were going to talk about it. Like they're still talking about it. It's funny. I actually turned my television off the next day because the first 2 blocks were all about LeBron instead of what the Denver Nuggets has accomplished. I mean, you think about it. They got to.
I love Charles Barkley. Man, he is just one of the best commentators on the NBA. He always says what he's thinking, and he was absolutely right. And even in this interview, they opened up wanting to talk about LeBron. And his point is, why aren't we talking about the Nuggets? Why aren't we talking about this historic season? And the truth is, the Nuggets are living in LeBron's shadow. And a lot of the NBA is living in LeBron's shadow. And, no shade on LeBron. I mean, he is and has been the best player in the NBA for many years now. Now, we all know he's not the greatest of all time. That's Michael Jordan. Okay, so let's not get crazy. Let's not get crazy, LeBron fans. It's still Michael Jordan. He's the greatest of all time. Fight me. He has been the best player for a long time. He's got a lot of championships. He's been to the finals a whole lot. Now, he's lost a lot of those finals, which, again, Michael Jordan never lost a final. And he's played for 20 years, and he scored more points than anyone else. Michael Jordan only played for 13 years and still put up incredible numbers. So I digress about Michael Jordan. People are living in LeBron's shadow. That is what's happening. And it's got to be frustrating. I mean, just feeling like all of your effort and all of your work isn't really amounting to much of anything. And here's my encouragement, because this doesn't just happen to famous NBA players. This happens to regular, everyday people like you and like me all of the time. You feel like you're doing your absolute best work at your job right now, and nobody seems to notice because you're not in management, or because one of your other employees causes so many problems that they get all of the attention and no one's seeing your good work. Maybe you are in the dating world and you have a lot to offer. You're a great guy. You're a great woman. And you just seem to get passed up. Maybe you're trying to hold to some more traditional values, and you're not wanting to just hook up on night number 1, which, if that's you, kudos to you. And you're not wanting to just meet people at the club. You're wanting to actually meet people in the flow of life. Or real crazy thought, you might want to meet them like at church or something like that. And you're just struggling, and it feels like you're getting passed up, and you're looking at the other friends that you had in high school, and they just seem way ahead of you, and they're doing things the wrong way. But man, at least they're going out on dates. At least people are swiping right. At least they're getting connections. At least they're getting attention. It's really easy to feel like we are living in the shadows, the business that you're trying to start. Man, I can feel that way a little bit trying to build this YouTube channel. I mean, it's like in one moment, I'll be like, oh, we passed 300 subscribers. Like we're on our way. And in the next moment, it's like, man, like we are, this channel right now is just in the very bottom of YouTube subscriber count, all of these massive behemoth, huge YouTube channels that are putting out these numbers that are absolutely insane. How do we continue to find encouragement and passion and move forward when we don't feel like we're getting the respect that we deserve, when we just feel like we're living in other people's shadows, overlooked, taken advantage of? I've always said, and I've been guilty of it as a leader myself, the people who do the best work the most consistently are the easiest to overlook. So the people who are like always on time and they always turn in their assignments, they always knock it out of the park, oftentimes they get the least amount of attention from leadership because they're easy to take for granted. They're going to show up and do their work, and you're busy chasing around, giving all your time and energy and all of your energy to these people who are, failing consistently or really struggling or not upholding the culture. So how do we do this, and what does this actually look like? And it reminds me of a very famous story in Scripture, a story that most people are going to be quite familiar with. We read about it in 1 Samuel 17. It says, now David was the son of the Ephrathite from Bethlehem of Judah named Jesse. And Jesse had 8 sons, and during Saul's reign was already an old man. And Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to war, and their names were Eliab the firstborn, Abinadab the next, and Shammah the third. And David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest had followed Saul. But David kept going back and forth from Saul to tend his father's flock in Bethlehem. And so David is overlooked and he is overshadowed. And we see this later in the story of when Samuel goes and anoints the next king of Israel, because it's going to come from this very family, from Jesse's family. And earlier in the story, they don't even bring David into the house. Samuel's like, let me see your sons, to Jesse. And he looks at the oldest and he looks at the second oldest and he goes through 6 of the sons. And God's like, it's none of them. And David is so much in the shadows, he's not even invited to the party. He's just like out watching the sheep. And so here he is once again, he's being left out. He's in his big brother's shadows, and he goes to, show up and see what's going on. And when he gets there to the battlefield, there is this giant of a man named Goliath. And every day Goliath is coming out and he's challenging to go one-on-one with someone from Israel's army. And whoever wins the whole war. And this is something that armies historically would do. And David spoke to the men who were standing with him. He said, what will be done for the man who kills that Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Just who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And so the troops let him know, what's going on, man. If anyone actually kills this guy, he'll be given the king's daughter, have all of this honor. And David is like, man, I'll do this, let me at him. Now he's a kid. He's like prepubescent. He's 12 or 13 years old, and he's just so insulted by this guy who's standing against these armies. And he's been living in the shadows, and he doesn't even necessarily seem all that upset about it. But this is his moment to step into the spotlight. And Saul heard about this, but when he met David, he's a kid. So Saul replied, you can't go fight this Philistine. You're just a youth, and he's been a warrior since he was young. And David answered Saul, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it, I struck it down, I rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed lions and bears, and this Philistine will be like one of them, for he's defied the armies of the living God. And then David said, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. And this is the story of David and Goliath. And David goes out, and he actually does have the advantage. And that's what people don't understand about the story of David and Goliath, is it seems like it's so improbable that this is going to work. But everyone is expecting hand-to-hand combat, sword and spear. And David has a different approach. He's a little guy, and he's protecting these sheep like they're made out of 24-karat gold. And so he doesn't necessarily fight hand-to-hand combat with all of these wild animals that are coming. He learns to be the expert of all experts with a slingshot. And that's what he pulls out. He pulls out the slingshot, 5 smooth stones. Turns out he only needed 1 in the chamber. He takes out Goliath. His story begins. He's the future king of Israel. It's an amazing story. All of that time in the shadows. Remember, the prophet comes to anoint a king David is left in the shadows, standing in the shadows of his big brothers. But in the shadows, he's working. And in the shadows, he's taking on the lion and he's taking on the bear. In the shadows, he's building his skill set. He's leveling up his courage. There's other things happening in the shadows. We learn about David. He became a musician. He's got a lot of downtime in the shadows. He learns the harp and he can play it like no one else. And eventually that puts him in the king's quarters because Saul's having these nightmares and no one knows how to soothe them. And somebody hears this little shepherd boy who is like, playing crazy solos on the harp. And now all of a sudden he's in another point of contact with the king. All of these ways that God is using his time in the shadows to prepare him to actually be the king of Israel, a man after God's own heart. And this is a familiar story in the scriptural canon. We have leaders like Moses, who was supposed to be killed as a child. His mother courageously saves him. He ends up being raised in the palace of Egypt. He is a Hebrew who is being raised by the palace that is enslaving all of the Hebrews. He's in the shadows. Nobody really knows about him. And then he goes even deeper into the shadows when he runs away from Egypt and spends like 40 years in the desert tending sheep. We see this again and again. Joshua, who eventually is the successor to Moses. One of my favorite verses in scripture, it says that Joshua never left the tent. What was the tent? The tent is where the Spirit of God hung out. The tent is where the scriptures were being written. The tent is where he would sit and meditate in the presence of God. Joshua wasn't always this big, outspoken, crazy leader. He was comfortable in the shadows. The Denver Nuggets, small market team. They've just been living in the shadows. My team, the San Antonio Spurs, small market team. For years and years, they just stayed in the shadows and racked up 5 championships and 20 winning seasons. There's power in the shadows, but you have to keep heart. You have to stay encouraged. The work that you do in the shadows is what builds you into a champion. And I don't often do this, but I'm going to give some flowers to LeBron because LeBron's story started in the shadows. LeBron's dad dipped out when he was pretty young. He was raised by a single mom. And his earliest years, he was brought in by a coach who became a father figure to him. His earliest years were spent grinding away in the gym before anyone knew his name. And all of a sudden, now it was like middle school. I mean, he blew up real early. But all of a sudden, people see this talent. And yeah, he's like magnificently physically gifted. I mean, he is a specimen. He's an Adonis, but he did the work in the shadows. He came prepared. He showed up as the number 1 pick with all the expectation of the world on his shoulders. And he actually held the weight. And so if you're in a shadow season right now, you're being overlooked or taken for granted. Things aren't going your way. Things aren't moving as quickly as you would want them to move. And I've been in those seasons. I'll tell a quick story. When we were in quarantine, we had 2 locations at our church. None of them could meet. We were renting all of our locations. A lot of it was not even in our control. And when we could finally meet, man, I just thought we were going to have record attendance. We were going to grow, explode. All these people have been sitting hopeless in their homes. Surely they're going to run back to the light of the gospel in their local church. And man, I was beyond wrong. We came back with about 25% of our pre-COVID attendance. And even a couple years later, we still aren't back to pre-COVID attendance. And God has done so much. We just continued to work in the shadows. And I had the encouragement of mentors above me and leaders above me and elders and overseers above me and the encouragement of a team around me who decided we were going to keep our hand to the plow and we were going to keep working, and that maybe God is using this time as like an incubator to get things in us that we need, strengths, skill sets, vision, worldview in us that we need to move forward. And in the shadows, he can get stuff out of us, the worst ways, the broken ways of thinking, the false narratives, the habits. He can get things out of us. And that's what can happen in the shadows. If you hold the faith and you believe that there is something for you, is you can be Jokić and the Nuggets, overlooked and underrated, and just grind year after year, getting better and better, and now be in a position where you're the favorite to win the championship. The work you do in the shadows is what builds you into a champion. And so trust God in the shadow seasons. Trust God when you're being overlooked. Continue to allow him to build these things in you. Continue to allow him to speak to you. Be open to taking inventory of your life and seeing the skill sets and strengths that you're missing, and go after those and pursue those and get as healthy and powerful as you can possibly be, and be willing to get some stuff out of you, some broken thoughts and broken habits, broken rhythms in your life. The things that happen in the shadow is what builds you into a king. It's what builds you into a champion.